Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, I'm DJ, and you're watching the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. We're doing a budget commander deck featuring Izoni Thousand-Eyed. Izoni Thousand-Eyed is 2 black, green for a 2/3 legendary elf shaman. Izoni has Undergrowth. When Izoni Thousand-Eyed enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. Izoni can also pay 1 and a green, sacrifice another creature, you gain 1 life, and draw a card. Izoni's a very classic Golgari commander. It goes wide with tokens, it has sacrifice synergies, and plays around with the graveyard. This seems to be a classic card that's going to have tons of support in our format. And when a commander has so many cards to support it in our color, then I feel like I can build a more budget deck, that there's more tools available, and so I'm striving to make this a budget deck. The first thing I want to do when I build this is pay attention to Undergrowth. This means I need a high creature count and a reliable way to get a ton of them into my graveyard, because Izoni needs to produce many insects to be effective. And when she creates all of these insects, well, the tokens need to be supported. I can always sacrifice them away and draw more cards. That's great. I'm glad that's on our commander. But I also want to make sure that they turn into a threat, and maybe we support some of these sacrifice themes. And then also, I want to support the graveyard and add to more graveyard themes. And I think that there's a very classic way to win. You make a bunch of insects, you have some sort of effect to pump them, and you swing in for the win. That seems pretty boring. That actually seems very standard. So maybe there are other ways to win so that I have some more redundancy in my deck and maybe a little bit more interest. The first thing I want to do is point out a great benefit for making this a budget deck. Wizards has put Izoni in her own deck. The Golgari Guild Kit is a 60-card deck, but it contains all sorts of really strong cards, and it's coming in at around $23, which is a pretty good deal, especially when you consider that you could get most of the way to a commander deck just with this simple purchase. I think it's funny that I measure the value of a 60-card deck in the ability to turn it into a 100-card deck, but that's just my perspective. If you want to pick up this guild kit or any of the cards I mentioned, tcgplayer.com has it for that $23 price, and they also sponsor the entire Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, so thank you to them. But let's get into the deck and find out how we're getting so many creatures into our graveyard. How are we supporting Undergrowth? Well, one of the best ways to get creatures into your graveyard is with creatures themselves. Stitcher Supplier, Glowspore Shaman, and Satyr Wayfinder. All of these dump cards into your graveyard, and if they happen to be dumped into your graveyard, well, they are also creatures, so that's really great. One card that also dumps a ton of value into your graveyard is Deathbridge Chant. It's such a fun card, but I find myself cutting it way too often, and it's actually included in that Golgari Guild Kit. The effect is perfect for Commander, and 10 cards in your graveyard, that's nothing to scoff at. Some more ways to send things to the graveyard. Splinter Fright is a huge beater, but also at the beginning of your upkeep, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. World Shaper, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard whenever it attacks. And it has the added benefit of maybe ramping you to 1,000,000 mana? Nyx Weaver as well. Upkeep 2 cards from your library into your graveyard, and you can sacrifice this spider to get a card back. That's pretty strong value when you're milling this much, because you get exactly what you want. We also have a few dredge cards, so if these end up in the graveyard, they can dump even more cards in, creating a really strong cycle. Stinkweed Imp and Golgari Grave Troll. Golgari Grave Troll can get really big, and so I'm excited to have it as an inclusion in this deck. Now we have all these ways to get cards into our graveyard. Let's make sure that we get some value out of them. I already mentioned World Shaper to get those lands back, Nyx Weaver to get a card back, but we can go even deeper with Skullwinder, Green Warden of Marasa, Den Protector. I even have Golgari Find Broker in here. It's a solid card, and it's getting a permanent back, but if you look at this deck, it's full of creatures, so this is going to get back exactly what you want. Notice no Eternal Witness in this list because Ewit is kind of expensive and you don't need it. You got budget options right here. I've also mentioned a few spells that get things in the graveyard: Mulch, Grizzly Salvage, Grapple with the Past, but I like the tutors that send things to the graveyard, like Gerard's Orders. A creature in your hand, a creature in the graveyard, that is amazing. Or Buried Alive, 3 creatures in your graveyard. That's a reliable dredge later on. That's getting something in your graveyard to then get back into your hand with many of these other effects. Heck, that's just 3 more insect tokens. I love this combination of creatures. And as long as we're putting so many into our graveyard, let's include Hell's Caretaker, Phyrexian Delver, Whisper, Blood Liturgist. All of these have the ability to change the creatures around, giving us a really dynamic board state. And in fact, we're going to have so many creatures. This deck has a strong creature focus. A lot of the creatures are going to have enter the battlefield effects or are going to have some sort of utility. Izoni is a great way of getting value out of those used up creatures because you can pay a green and a black and sacrifice that creature to draw a card, but we can have other sacrifice outlets in this deck. Altar of Dementia and Ashnod's Altar. I particularly like Altar of Dementia in this deck, even though it's pushing $6, because you can mill yourself, making your Izoni even bigger. And then a whole suite of awesome cards: Viscera Seer, Yahenni, and Sadistic Hypnotist, all of them providing free sacrifice outlets and some really strong effects. There's a few more sacrifice outlets that I like. Evolutionary Leap. Not free, but it gets you to your next creature. This is amazing. And then Krav the Unredeemed. I wasn't thinking of Krav until a patron suggested it to me, and I'm realizing how strong it is, because even without Regna, Krav can sacrifice X creatures. That means you can sacrifice your entire army of insects and draw that many cards and make Krav huge. Sacrificing creatures for card draw is just great. You're going to realize that this deck turns into an engine where all of your creatures give lots of value, and when they stop providing you value, you get rid of them and you draw more cards. Skull Clamp really does belong in this deck. It's even better for mowing through Izoni's tokens and drawing tons of cards. And as long as we have so many sacrifice outlets, Death Reap Ritual could draw you multiple cards a turn. I usually like something a little bit more reliable than this enchantment, but in this deck, yeah, I think that you can gain a ton of value by just sacrificing every opponent's turn as well. And these sacrifice themes, they keep on coming. Poison Tip Archer, Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist, all of these can provide enough value to just kill your enemies. I talked about how important card draw is in this deck, and it really is, especially with the high creature count. We don't have a lot of cards that just say, draw a card. So we are leaning very heavily on cards like Beast Whisperer, Vizier of the Menagerie, and Lifecrafter's Bestiary. These are awesome, and we're spending a little bit of our budget in this area, but these are great additions. Beast Whisperer is only $1, Vizier of the Menagerie, $3, Lifecrafter's Bestiary, $1. All of these are such solid cards in this type of deck. These are going to be overperformers, even though they're not that expensive. And so I honestly think that this suite of cards can go into many different decks, and you got to pick up some of them. Next, we have 2 cards that I have fallen in love with. Path of Discovery. It's an enchantment that does nothing unless creatures enter the battlefield, but when they do, they explore. So you're drawing cards or you're putting things into the graveyard. That's exactly where you want to put them, and pumping your guys. One thing that's great is that Izoni puts a bunch of tokens on the battlefield. In fact, there's a few cards in this deck that produce tokens. Yeah, this doesn't care about tokens or anything. It's just gonna trigger Explore, and you're gonna draw a card, or you're gonna be able to mill something relevant in your graveyard to then make your Izoni, make your reanimation spells, make everything better. And then the card that I love that's a little bit on the edge in terms of budget is Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod is a phenomenal artifact. I don't know how much it would be if it was legal in Modern, but way more than $10. It's sad that this is outside of so many people's budgets, but I've found a way to fit it into this one. Once you have Birthing Pod on the battlefield, you can pay 1 and a green or Phyrexian, that's a green mana or 2 life, Sacrifice a creature and you get to search for a creature that's 1 CMC higher and put it straight onto the battlefield. So you get to use up all of those useless creatures. You have a stupid mana dork, well, go get a 2-drop. You have a useless 4-drop, well, you can change it up into an amazing 5-drop. Birthing Pod gets things in the graveyard and searches exactly what you need out of your deck. It's phenomenal. Amazing, especially in a deck that hinges on sacrifice and graveyard synergies. It's amazing. I know the card is not the same, but I like to think of Birthing Pod as a sort of budget survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest is amazing, but it's $90, and I want that same searching, tutoring effect on a budget. And even though it's steep, coming in at 10% of the whole budget, I've decided that Birthing Pod is where I'm spending my money in this deck. Well, along with a couple other things. Okay, as long as I'm sacrificing so many creatures, I've talked about a few of them, there's some more sacrifice synergy in Butcher of Malakir and Dictate of Erebos. Dictate of Erebos says, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Yes! It's also got Flash, which is really cool. I have a million ways to kill creatures, and so Dictate of Erebos can make for huge one-sided board wipes. I sacrifice an insect, you sacrifice your amazing thing. Dictate is also stretching the budget at $7, but it's a little bit cheaper than its older brother Grave Pact, 1 black, 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 and that's $12. But Butcher's pretty cheap, and a creature, so I like that a lot. One last sacrifice synergy that supports the token strategy, Mazarek, Crawl Death Priest. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Each creature. We're going wide, we're putting insects onto the battlefield, we have a sacrifice outlet on our commander. And this includes all of our opponents as well. If we trigger a Dictate of Erebos, then suddenly we're growing our team by a ton. If they crack a fetch land, our team is gonna be gigantic. This creature is incredibly powerful and I don't see it at enough commander tables. So let's get playing with Mazarek. So Mazarek has described a single strategy, which is, hey, let's put a bunch of tokens on the battlefield and let's make them bigger. And that is totally fine, and I will support some of that. But I also want the ability to maybe stretch this strategy a little bit. I'm thinking maybe a card like Temur Sabertooth, where you can bounce things back to your hand and play them again, and just go wide enough that we don't need to grow our team. Or maybe Conjurer's Closet, flicker Izoni over and over again and get more and more insects. That sounds pretty cool. But I think the default win condition is still going to be cards like Craterhoof Behemoth, Beastmaster's Ascension, Pathbreaker Ibex, all of these ways to make our tiny creatures gigantic. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like I want something a little bit different. Maybe another strategy would be going big mass graveyard, so card like Rise of the Dark Realms. Coming in at $12, not cheap, but put all creature cards from all graveyards on the battlefield under your control. You are going to be milling like crazy, and so just your own graveyard could be enough to win the game. And yeah, we'll just include the opponent's graveyards too. But I think I want a little bit different strategy. If I'm putting so many things in my graveyard, maybe I have a way to weaponize that. I saw this card in the set review, and Lotleth Giant seemed fun. 6 and a black for a 6/5 zombie giant, and when it enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. I love the idea of Lotleth Troll being a huge creature fireball. Oh, I got 30 in my graveyard. Wha-pow, 30 you. Okay, we might not end up with 30, but we have a lot. We have a ton, and we could literally pop people for 20 with our 6/5, and then do it again and again. And finally, the last way to weaponize our graveyard, Mortal Combat. 2 black for an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If 20 or more creature cards are in your graveyard, you win the game. I love you win the game cards, and I like the idea of this coming out of nowhere, and it is a significant hoop to jump through. You're gonna have to get way more than half of your deck into your graveyard for Mortal Kombat to come online. And so this is a challenge. But one thing is that this is an enchantment as well. We have ways to get things from our graveyard back into our hand. And so Mortal Kombat could be that little interesting bit of taste. And if you can pull off that win, it's gonna feel so good. All right, so this budget Izoni 1000 Eyes deck is coming in at just under $100, and I think that it is strong. I think there's a lot of play to it. There's tutoring. I really like how much card draw this has. There's so many ways to keep going forward, keep moving. And Izoni is what you really need. If you just keep hitting your land drops, keep ramping, your creatures will draw you into answers, your creatures will provide value over turns, and you won't stall out. And then eventually, Izoni will keep producing more and more insects, and you will overwhelm your opponents. And yeah, you might be able to just win out of nowhere with a gigantic Lotlith Troll Fireball to the face. I want to thank you so much for watching, and particularly thank my patrons. Thank you so much, patrons. You support me, and I truly appreciate you. If you want to be a patron, head on over to patreon.com/JumboCommander and see how you can support the stuff that I do. But that's okay. You can support me by liking, sharing, commenting, heck, subscribing to my channel, watching my other videos, tweeting at me. There are tons of ways that you could support me, but most importantly, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. And I'm going to see you really soon for more Commander Deck Techs. Bye-bye.